I never thought moving into Oakwood Gardens would turn into a suburban warfare saga, but here we are. Let me tell you about how my homeowners association Karen's vendetta against my unauthorized parking spot backfired in the most spectacular way possible. Grab some popcorn because this story has more twists than her perfectly manicured garden path. And trust me, you'll want to stick around for the ending. I should probably start by explaining how I ended up in what my friends now jokingly call Karen's Kingdom. After 5 years of apartment living in the city, dealing with constant noise and a landlord who thought maintenance requests were more like gentle suggestions, I'd finally saved enough for a down payment on my dream home. The moment I turned onto Maple Drive, with its rows of mature oak trees creating a natural canopy over the street, I knew this was it. The house at number 47 was perfect. A charming colonial with bay windows, a wraparound porch, and the kind of architectural details you just don't see in modern construction. The real estate agent, Sarah, was suspiciously eager to mention the very active Homeowners Association and their commitment to maintaining property values. Looking back, I should have noticed how she emphasized those points with a slightly nervous laugh. But I was too enchanted by the crown molding and original hardwood floors to pick up on her subtle warnings. What I didn't know then was that I'd also inherited a front-row seat to Patricia Wellington's one-woman crusade to maintain the character and integrity of our neighborhood. If there was an Olympic event for micromanaging an entire community, Patricia would take gold, silver, and probably demand they create a platinum medal just for her. Patricia, or Trish as she insists everyone calls her, though never to her face, is our Homeowners Association president. Picture a woman in her mid-50s with an asymmetrical blonde bob that probably hasn't changed since 1995, permanently pressed khakis, and a polo shirt collection that would put any country club to shame. She power walks through the neighborhood every morning at precisely 7:15, clipboard in hand, documenting any blade of grass that dares to grow above regulation height. Her husband Gerald is rarely seen but often heard about, as Patricia frequently references his position as a very important executive at a local insurance company. The running joke among neighbors is that Gerald's probably just hiding in their perfectly organized garage, alphabetizing his socket wrench collection to avoid another conversation about unauthorized bird feeder heights. The first week in my new home was deceptively peaceful. I was unpacking boxes, getting to know my neighbors, and settling into my new routine as a forensic accountant, working remotely for the county. My partner in the police department had recommended the neighborhood, mentioning it was quiet and well-maintained. "It's perfect for someone who works from home," he'd said. "Really orderly community." Now I understand why he was trying not to smile when he said that. My next-door neighbor, Tom, was the first to warn me about Patricia. He caught me outside one evening as I was bringing in my recycling bin, exactly 17 minutes after the mandated post-collection retrieval time, as I would later learn from one of Patricia's many notices. "So, has our fearless leader welcomed you to the neighborhood yet?" Tom asked, leaning against his meticulously maintained fence, which was, of course, painted in one of the 7 approved Homeowners Association fence colors, timeless taupe, to be specific. "You mean Patricia?" I replied. "Not yet, but I've seen her walking around with her clipboard." Tom chuckled. "Ah, the infamous clipboard. You know, last month she cited me because my grass was casting shadows in an unapproved pattern. I wish I was joking." I laughed, thinking he was exaggerating. I'm not laughing anymore. The trouble began when I started parking my car in my driveway instead of the garage. You see, I'd converted the garage into a home office, completely within Homeowners Association guidelines, I might add. Working with financial crimes requires a secure, private space, and the garage was perfect once it was properly renovated. I'd submitted all the proper paperwork, gotten the necessary approvals, and even had the Homeowners Association Architectural Committee sign off on it. The committee chairman, a retired architect named Mr. Patel, had been particularly helpful in ensuring everything met both Homeowners Association standards and local building codes. But apparently Patricia had missed that memo, or more likely, she'd chosen to interpret the rules in her own special way, like a suburban dictator with a very specific vision for her kingdom. It was a Tuesday morning when I found the first notice on my windshield. The paper was thick, cream-colored cardstock because heaven forbid our homeowners association use anything less than premium stationery, with the association's logo watermarked in the background. Patricia had once spent an entire homeowners association meeting, yes, I went back and watched the archived recording, discussing the importance of maintaining premium community correspondence standards. The message was typed in a font that somehow managed to look condescending. Notice of violation. Unauthorized vehicle storage in residential driveway. All vehicles must be stored in approved garages per Home Owners Association Bylaw 7.3. Please rectify this violation within 48 hours to avoid further action. I'll admit I chuckled. Then I did what any reasonable person would do. I pulled out my approved garage conversion paperwork and emailed copies to the Home Owners Association's general inbox. I even included a polite note explaining that my parking arrangement was pre-approved and offering to provide additional documentation if needed. In my line of work, you learn that documentation is everything, and I'd made sure to keep meticulous records of all my home improvements and approvals. The next day I received a reply from Patricia herself. The email was a masterpiece of passive-aggressive formatting, with certain phrases in bold and others underlined for maximum effect. She'd even managed to find a way to make Times New Roman look judgmental. Dear resident of 47 Maple Drive, while we appreciate your attempt to justify your parking situation, the approval you referenced was for the garage conversion only. Permanent driveway parking remains prohibited. We suggest you make alternative arrangements immediately. Furthermore, your email was received at 9:47 p.m., which falls outside approved Homeowners Association communication hours, 8 a.m. to 8 p.m., Monday through Friday. Please ensure all future correspondence adheres to appropriate timing protocols. Best regards. Patricia Wellington, Homeowners Association President, Oakwood Gardens Community Association. Maintaining excellence since 1987. Please consider the environment before printing this email unless it's a Homeowners Association violation notice, which must be printed in triplicate and filed appropriately. I responded with screenshots of the specific bylaw sections that confirmed my right to park in my own driveway. I even highlighted the relevant passages and included the date stamps of all approvals. Professional, thorough, and completely by the book, just like I'd been trained to handle difficult situations in my forensic accounting work. And yes, I made sure to send it at 7:59 p.m., because sometimes malicious compliance is its own reward. That's when things started getting interesting. The next morning I found my car decorated with no fewer than 7 violation notices, each printed on increasingly expensive-looking paper. They were stuck under my wipers, tucked into the door handles, and one was even carefully positioned under my license plate. Each cited a different supposed violation, from non-standard tire pressure affecting community aesthetics, seriously, to unauthorized vehicle color not within approved Homeowners Association palette. My car is silver, a completely standard, factory-issued silver, the same silver you see on thousands of cars every day, but, according to Patricia's notice, it was exhibiting reflective properties that exceed acceptable limits during peak sunlight hours. I documented everything, taking photos and saving copies of all correspondence. My years of forensic accounting had taught me the value of a well-maintained paper trail. I also started my morning routine 15 minutes earlier, allowing me to wave cheerfully at Patricia during her power walking patrols. Her sour expression every time I did this was better than my morning coffee. The neighbors started taking notice of our little drama. Mrs. Chen from across the street brought me homemade dumplings and shared stories about her own run-ins with Patricia. Apparently, Patricia had once measured the steam coming from Mrs. Chen's kitchen window to ensure it didn't exceed acceptable cooking vapor limits. The Rodriguez family 2 doors down warned me about the time Patricia tried to ban their daughter's lemonade stand for operating an unauthorized business venture on residential property and displaying citrus products in a manner inconsistent with Homeowners Association aesthetic guidelines. But Patricia wasn't done. Oh no, she was just getting warmed up. Over the next 2 weeks, I received daily notices, each more creative than the last. My favorite was the one claiming my car's presence was causing undue emotional distress to local wildlife. Apparently, a squirrel had been seen exhibiting signs of anxiety while crossing my driveway. I actually framed that one. It's now hanging in my home office next to my forensic accounting certifications. Patricia also started holding impromptu homeowners association emergency meetings on her front lawn, just within earshot of my home office window. I would hear snippets of conversations about property value degradation and the slow decay of community standards. Once I caught her leading a small group of concerned neighbors in a dramatic reading of the parking bylaws. I have to admit, her interpretation of Section 8.4, Paragraph 3, acceptable reflective surfaces and their impact on community harmony, was quite passionate. I maintained my cool, responding to each notice with polite, professional emails citing the relevant bylaws and regulations. I even started adding smiley face emoticons to my signatures, knowing it would drive Patricia crazy but give her nothing concrete to complain about. My favorite was responding to her wildlife distress notice with links to scientific studies about squirrel behavior in suburban environments. Then came the regular monthly homeowners association meeting. The big one. The showdown that would go down in Oakwood Gardens history. It was a Thursday evening in the community center, and Patricia had placed unauthorized vehicle storage at 47 Maple Drive, a community crisis, as the first item on the agenda. I arrived early, armed with copies of all my documentation, and took a seat in the front row. The look on Patricia's face when I walked in was priceless, like someone had just told her they were painting their shutters chartreuse. She'd prepared a full presentation, complete with professional quality photographs of my car taken from various angles throughout the day. There were graphs showing the supposed correlation between visible driveways and declining property values. She'd even included a chart tracking the increasing number of unauthorized parking incidents in the neighborhood, which somehow all began the day I moved in. As you can all see, Patricia began, standing at the podium in what I'm sure she thought was an authoritative pose, we have a serious situation developing in our community. The presence of this vehicle is setting a dangerous precedent that could lead to chaos in our streets. Today it's one car in a driveway. Tomorrow? Well, I've prepared a simulation. The simulation, as it turned out, was a series of poorly photoshopped images showing our neighborhood transformed into what she called a parking apocalypse. In her dystopian vision of the future, every driveway was filled with cars, some apparently defying the laws of physics by parking vertically. She'd even added what looked like a monster truck perched on someone's roof. I waited patiently through her 15-minute presentation, which included a dramatic reading of selected homeowners association bylaws and a surprisingly emotional interpretation of the community's founding principles. The other residents were shifting uncomfortably in their seats, some hiding smirks behind their hands, others openly rolling their eyes. When it was my turn to speak, I simply walked to the podium, thanked Patricia for her thorough presentation, and displayed my approved paperwork on the projector. As you can see, I said calmly, everything is in order and fully compliant with our bylaws. I'm happy to answer any questions about the proper approval process for home improvements and parking arrangements. The silence in the room was deafening. Patricia's face had turned an interesting shade of purple that definitely wasn't in the approved Homeowners Association color palette. Mr. Patel, the Architectural Committee chairman, cleared his throat and confirmed that my garage conversion and subsequent parking arrangement were, indeed, fully approved. That's when I made my tactical error. I got comfortable. I thought I'd won. I thought Patricia would back down and find someone else to harass. Maybe she'd go back to measuring the angles of everyone's satellite dishes or calculating the mathematical symmetry of their hedge trimming. I was wrong. The next morning I headed out to my car, keys in hand, ready for another day of working from home. That's when I noticed something odd about my tires. They looked wrong. As I got closer, my heart sank. Nails. Dozens of them, scattered across my driveway in a pattern that was too deliberate to be accidental. I called 911 immediately, then started taking pictures. The nails were roofing nails, the kind you can buy at any hardware store. They were arranged in a way that made it impossible to back out without hitting at least some of them. In fact, I could already see that my right front tire was slowly deflating. As I waited for the police to arrive, I noticed movement behind Patricia's living room curtains. I could have sworn I saw a flash of that distinctive asymmetrical bob, quickly followed by the unmistakable sound of her power-walking shoes retreating from the window. Little did she know, but Patricia's escalation was about to trigger a series of events that would make our little homeowners association drama look like a page in the community newsletter. Because there was something about my car, something very important that Patricia didn't know, something that would turn her crusade for parking enforcement into the biggest mistake of her homeowners association career. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you what happened next, and how Patricia's war on my parking spot turned into a masterclass in karma that our neighborhood still talks about today. The police officer who responded to my call, Officer James Rodriguez, was trying very hard to maintain his professional demeanor, but I could see he was struggling. He kept glancing between the artfully arranged nails and my slowly deflating tire with an expression that suggested he couldn't decide if this was amusing or absurd. "And you say you have documentation of the ongoing dispute?" he asked, carefully bagging several nails as evidence. He was being thorough, photographing the precise pattern of the nails, which, I had to admit, showed an almost impressive attention to detail. They were arranged in neat rows, ensuring maximum coverage of any possible exit route from my driveway. "Oh, you have no idea," I replied, pulling out my phone to show him the extensive email thread and photos of all the violation notices. "I've been keeping records of everything since it started. I'm a forensic accountant. Documentation is kind of my thing." I showed him my carefully organized digital folder, labeled Patricia's Greatest Hits, complete with subfolders for each category of violation notice. Officer Rodriguez raised an eyebrow as he scrolled through the photos. Did she really cite you for excessive tire roundness?" That was last Thursday. Apparently, my tires were unnecessarily spherical and creating aggressive geometric continuity in an otherwise rectangular driveway space. That's when we heard the distinctive sound of Patricia's power-walking shoes on the sidewalk, a rhythmic clip-clop that had become as reliable as a neighborhood warning system. She appeared at the edge of my driveway, yoga pants and polo shirt impeccable as always, her signature asymmetrical bob swaying with each determined step. She was trying to look both concerned and innocent at the same time, an expression she'd clearly practiced in front of a mirror. "Oh my goodness," she gasped, pressing a perfectly manicured hand to her chest. "What happened here? I was just on my morning constitutional when I noticed the police presence. Is everything all right?" As Homeowners Association president, I feel personally responsible for the safety and security of our community. Officer Rodriguez turned to face her, and I noticed his professional mask slip just slightly. His right eyebrow twitched, the same twitch I'd seen in my years working with law enforcement when they knew someone was feeding them a line. "Ma'am, are you Patricia Wellington?" "Why, yes, I am the Homeowners Association president," she replied, straightening her posture even more, if that was possible. Her voice took on that special tone reserved for authority figures, the one that suggested she considered herself their equal, if not superior. "I'd be happy to provide any assistance needed in this unfortunate situation. Perhaps we should discuss this at the next Homeowners Association meeting. I can add it to the agenda under Community Security Concerns and Driveway Maintenance Standards." "Ma'am, we have reason to believe this may be related to an ongoing dispute regarding parking regulations. Would you be willing to answer a few questions about your whereabouts this morning between 5 and 6 a.m.? Patricia's face went through several interesting expressions before settling on indignant concern. It was like watching someone flip through a catalog of concerned citizen poses before landing on "wrongly accused, pillar of the community." "I simply cannot imagine what you mean," she replied, her voice climbing half an octave. "While it's true that there have been some discussions about proper vehicle storage in our community, I would never condone any sort of vandalism. Perhaps this is related to the growing parking crisis I've been warning the board about. Just last week, I submitted a 73-page report on the correlation between visible vehicles and the decline of civilized society. That's when things got interesting. Because at that exact moment, a familiar black SUV pulled up to the curb. Chief Williams stepped out, coffee in hand, and surveyed the scene with raised eyebrows. He was wearing his usual impeccable uniform, and I could see Patricia's eyes darting between his chief's badges and my silver sedan, her brain trying to process the connection. "Morning, Chief," Officer Rodriguez called out, suddenly standing a bit straighter. "Didn't expect to see you here this early." "Well," the chief replied, walking over to examine my car while taking a sip from his coffee cup, which I noticed with amusement was definitely not in an approved homeowners association color. "When I got the call about vandalism to my vehicle, I thought I should check it out personally." The sound Patricia made was somewhere between a gasp and a squeak. It was the sound of someone's world shifting sideways, like a perfectly arranged garden suddenly tilting 45 degrees. "You see, there's something I haven't mentioned yet. While I do work as a forensic accountant for the county, I also consult extensively with the police department on financial crimes. Over the past year, I'd helped crack several major cases involving money laundering and corporate fraud, and due to some recent threats related to a case I was working on, Chief Williams had insisted on providing me with a department vehicle for my personal use, the very same silver sedan that Patricia had been waging war against for the past month. Your vehicle?" Patricia stammered, her face now doing an impressive impression of a chameleon trying to blend in with a fire truck. Her clipboard, ever present during her morning patrols, slipped from her fingers and clattered to the ground, scattering violation notices like autumn leaves. Chief Williams nodded, taking another sip of his coffee. "Department issue. And now we have a situation involving attempted vandalism of police property, possible harassment, and what could be construed as retaliation against a law enforcement consultant." He paused, looking directly at Patricia. "That's a whole different level of problems, Mrs. Wellington." I almost felt sorry for Patricia. Almost. But then I remembered the nails, the endless violation notices, and the squirrel anxiety incident. What followed was a flurry of activity that had the whole neighborhood watching from behind their curtains, though of course window watching was technically prohibited under Homeowners Association Bylaw 12.7, subsection 4, prohibited surveillance activities and appropriate community awareness guidelines. More officers arrived to canvass the area and interview neighbors. Mrs. Chen was particularly helpful, providing security camera footage from her doorbell camera that showed a figure suspiciously similar to Patricia spreading something in my driveway at 5:45 that morning. The figure was wearing Patricia's distinctive power walking outfit and carrying what appeared to be a Home Depot shopping bag. "I installed the camera last month," Mrs. Chen explained to the officers, a slight smile playing at her lips. "After Patricia suggested my wind chimes were creating unauthorized Asian fusion ambient noise in violation of the Cultural Sound Ordinance." The Rodriguez family from 2 doors down also came forward, providing additional footage from their security system that showed Patricia's garage door opening and closing at suspicious hours. Their teenage daughter, Maria, she of the band Lemonade Stand, couldn't quite hide her grin as she showed the officers her timestamps. Patricia, of course, denied everything. She claimed she had no idea how the nails got there and suggested that perhaps I had placed them myself to frame her. This theory fell apart rather quickly when Officer Rodriguez discovered identical nails in her garage while executing a search warrant, complete with the Home Depot receipt from the previous day. The receipt, ironically, was perfectly filed in her meticulously organized home maintenance supplies binder under for nails roofing professional grade. They also found a detailed notebook containing what she called her community compliance documentation. It was essentially a diary of her harassment campaign, complete with photos, timestamps, and color-coded tabs for different categories of violations. She had even created a spreadsheet tracking the psychological impact of her escalating notices, with a column labeled Estimated Probability of Parking Submission. The investigation even uncovered a series of surveillance photos Patricia had taken of my car at various times of day, each meticulously labeled with timestamps and notes about concerning parking behaviors. One photo was marked, "Subject vehicle appears to be mocking homeowners association authority by reflecting sunlight in non-regulation directions." Another folder contained detailed sketches of what she called her parking deterrence strategy, including several abandoned plans involving sprinklers, birdseed, and what appeared to be a small army of garden gnomes, strategically positioned to create an atmosphere of constant observation. The fallout was swift and comprehensive. Patricia was arrested for vandalism of police property, attempted destruction of government property, and harassment. The local news picked up the story, running with the headline, "Homeowners Association President Arrested in Failed Attempt to Enforce Parking Rules on Police Vehicle." The subtitle read, "Local Wildlife Unavailable for Comment on Emotional Distress." But the real karma came from within the community itself. An emergency homeowners association meeting was called, held in the community center, which was, for the first time in recent memory, packed to capacity. Patricia's reign as president was officially over, ended by a unanimous vote that even included her husband Gerald, who had apparently emerged from his garage-based exile to attend the meeting. The new board's first act was to review and simplify many of the more ridiculous regulations that Patricia had implemented over the years. The revised guidelines, now a reasonable 10 pages instead of the previous 342, focused on actual community needs rather than micromanaging every aspect of suburban life. Mrs. Rodriguez's daughter's lemonade stand was not only officially approved but given a prime spot at the community center during summer events. She even added a special Homeowners Association approved banner to her stand with a small asterisk noting, "No squirrels were emotionally distressed in the making of this lemonade." Mrs. Chen was finally allowed to plant her traditional Chinese herbs in her front garden, and her wind chimes were reclassified from unauthorized ambient noise to welcome community atmosphere enhancement. The Chen family celebrated by hosting a neighborhood dumpling party, complete with a wind chime concert. And my car? Well, it continued to park proudly in my driveway, now serving as a symbol of the community's victory over petty tyranny. Some neighbors even started deliberately parking their own cars in their driveways, in solidarity, creating what one resident jokingly called the Great Driveway Liberation of 2025. Patricia put her house on the market 2 weeks later, but had trouble selling it because, ironically, it didn't meet several of the Homeowners Association regulations she herself had created. The new board had to grant her several exemptions just so she could complete the sale, including a special dispensation for her non-standard grass blade alignment and excessive shrubbery symmetry. As for me, I still wave cheerfully every morning, but now it's to my neighbors walking their dogs or jogging past. The community has become closer, more tolerant, and significantly more relaxed about things like car colors and grass height. We even started a monthly block party tradition, in our driveways, of course. The nails? They're now mounted in a shadow box in the community center, along with Patricia's final violation notice about the unauthorized vehicle color and a photograph of that allegedly anxious squirrel. It serves as a reminder that sometimes the best way to build a strong community isn't through rigid rules and regulations, but through understanding, cooperation, and maybe a little bit of karma. Chief Williams still stops by regularly, both to check on his vehicle and to join us for our community events. He particularly enjoys telling new residents the story of the Homeowners Association Karen, who didn't realize she was going to war with the police department over a parking spot. It always gets a good laugh, especially when we get to the part about the emotional distress to local wildlife. The moral of the story? Well, there are several. Don't mess with someone's car. Don't assume you know more than you do. And maybe, just maybe, think twice before you try to enforce parking regulations on a police-issued vehicle. Oh, and one more thing. Silver is definitely an approved color in our Homeowners Association palette now. We made sure to add that to the bylaws just in case, right after we approved Mrs. Chen's wind chimes, and right before we passed the Right to Reasonable Squirrel Anxiety Amendment. Gerald, by the way, has finally emerged from his garage. He's now teaching a community class on socket wrench organization. though he still twitches slightly whenever someone mentions parking regulations or clipboard-wielding power walkers.